In the 21st century workplace, we're working with brains that are really better designed for the savannah. They're not designed for the 21st century workplace. And that's the challenge we all face, that dealing with technology and emails popping up and phones going off and whatever it might be, open plan offices, our brains are not designed to deal with that. The good news, I think, is if we can understand our brains better, we can work with that knowledge and we can manage things to help our brains work at their best. Every one of us should understand our brains better to enable us to work with that knowledge and to make choices and help the brain keep performing at its best. And so the good news is we have got more control of our brains than we realise when we understand them.
Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustace, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi everybody, it's Barry Eustace here from the Just Great People podcast. Delighted to welcome Hilary Scarlett from Scarlett and Gray Consultancy and the author of Neuroscience for Organizational Change, a book that's very dear to my heart. One that I've read, I've highlighted endlessly. There are more highlights in there than text, I think now. Recommended to me at someone at Jet Propulsion Lab in the States, and I've never regretted reading it. And I'm so pleased to have Hilary on the Just Great People podcast. Hilary, welcome, and please do tell us all about you and also the book.
Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. So a bit of background about me might be helpful. So my background over the years is in organisational change, and particularly with a focus on the people side of change. How do you help people through change in organisations? And having done studies in psychology about, 15 plus years ago, postgraduate studies, I came across an article written by a psychiatrist saying we can now understand enough about the human brain to apply that to the world of work. And that really caught my interest, thinking perhaps if we can bring a bit more science and evidence to what's going on when we're going through change, that would be helpful. So originally I studied virtually with neuroscientists in the States. Over the last 10 years or so, have also been working with neuroscientists here in the UK, particularly at University College London. And I kind of see my role as taking their work out of the lab and bringing it into the workplace in a practical way. So the sessions I run, I try to bring some of the science, the evidence, but perhaps more importantly, what does that mean to people who work in organisations? What can we take from it in a practical way? So that's kind of my background.
And it's a critically important element of the whole change picture, because it's actually, if we start that change is broadly about people, understanding how people are wired, the connections, the hard, soft wiring is so important. And it was a really enlightening read for me. And I have to say that it's something I've applied constantly. The book sounds heavy. Neuroscience for Organizational Change sounds like a bit of a heavy read, and it's not. It's not. I found it really practical. And again, another field guide I was speaking to Julie Hodges about her book, People-Centered Change. Again, Julie's written a book that was very practical and a field guide for how to do it. And Neuroscience for Organizational Change is exactly that kind of book. It's the summaries, the reflections, the practical application is just so straightforward and easy to follow without heavy use of techie language. Dare I say techie? Is that the right word? And so is just a very straightforward, common sense, practical read for anybody who's serious about change, in my view. Is that how you intended it to be?
Absolutely. And maybe, I'm not a neuroscientist by background, and in some ways that I think that's quite helpful. So my background is very much working with organisations going through change. So I think it means I can go to the neuroscientist and ask the dumb question. I kind of feel like if I understand it, if I can put it into my words that I get it, then I kind of think other people will get it too. So yeah, I very much wanted it to be a practical guide. And actually the book I loved, and actually I took it with me to my publishing company, Coca Page. The very first meeting I had with them was William Bridges' Transitions. I don't know whether you're familiar with that book. He wrote it, 30, 40 years ago, probably. But it's quite, again, it just gives some of the psychology about change, but also the kind of practical things we can do. And I thought that's what I love, a book that's got the evidence, it's rooted in that, but also, perhaps more importantly, what can we do? How is that relevant to us? What can we take from it? And I think in all the sessions, in a way, I wanted the book to replicate the sessions I run with people. Here's some of the science, here's some of the evidence. So what does that mean? What do you take from that? What's useful for you? Yes, I'm delighted to hear you took it took it as a very practical book, because that was very much my aim.
I reviewed Hilary's book, and it's exactly what I said. It's that practical application. It's moving away from the academic approach to the field approach. What you actually do, how you do it, when, what order, the practical application. Go away, think about it, and some wonderful takeaways that are easy to hang your hat on as spaces. Which is a particular favorite of mine, kind of summarizes it all in an easy way, because easy signposting, I think, is important. And was that, perhaps you'd take us through spaces, Hilary. I would do it here, but I have got it here. I always have it here. So, but if you could take us through, that would be great.
Yeah, no, so spaces stands for 6 factors that if we've got them, we can focus, we can perform, we're more resilient, we can collaborate better. But if we haven't got them, our brains go into a negative place where we cannot work at our best. So there are 6 factors. They all matter to all of us, but we do each have different preferences. Those preferences can change over time in different circumstances. And spaces, I think, is useful in several ways. One, as a planning tool. So how do I use it kind of as a planning checklist? And how do I plan? It can be change a macro scale, a micro scale, a team meeting, a phone call. How do I plan that thing to make sure as much as possible people have got these 6 factors? I think it's also a really useful tool to use with teams. Which is the one that really matters to you? If you've got it, puts your brain into a positive place where you can work well. If you haven't got it, puts you into a negative place. And the benefit of that is this is a way of working with people that activates what's called the reward center in the brain. It's not about giving people more money, it's about how I work with you. So the 6 factors are, SPACES is the acronym. It stands for, S stands for self-esteem. So this is the bit about feeling good about ourselves, feeling that we're respected, feeling that we're trusted, feeling that we're doing well at work. This one will also be important to the self-improvers in the team, because this one also is about how can I be better than the me I was yesterday, by which I mean the people who want to learn and get better. So this one will really matter to the self-improvers. So on that one, how can we show people we trust them? How can we show people we respect them? How can we remind people of how much they have learned and improved over the last 6 months? How can we give people more learning opportunities? P stands for purpose. Again, there's a lot of work that shows that purpose really matters to us and makes a big difference. And particularly because we are such deeply social creatures, having a sense that the work that I do makes a difference to other people. So with this one, how can we remind people, how can we demonstrate to people that the difference they make to others, either in the organisation or outside the organisation, makes a big difference to us? And the work I often quote around that one is work that is done by Adam Grant, who's professor of psychology at Wharton in the States. And in one of his many books called Give and Take, he did some really interesting research in North American universities with fundraising teams. Raising, I think, as we all know, is a tough job. People don't like it. High turnover of staff. So he went into various North American universities and colleges, met the fundraising team, but divided them into 2. And one half got to meet a beneficiary of their work. Someone had gone through that college or university, in part because of the money these people had raised. Just a short meeting. And Adam Grant found that the half that got to meet the beneficiary, their fundraising went up by 171% compared with the half that didn't get to meet the beneficiary. And even into the following month, they were making more calls, they were being more successful. So I think that research just really brings home the importance of being, I'm making a difference, I'm doing something useful. A is for autonomy. Choice is hugely important to the human brain. Where can we let go? Where can we give people a bit of choice, a bit of control over what goes on? It makes a big difference in any change, any organisation. C is for certainty. Our brains crave certainty. Too much so, because I think it's something we all know, it's something we can never have, but it's what our brains want. They want certainty to better protect us. And so again, on this one, where can we give people information that helps to settle the brain? And it could be just little things. Because one of the common ones I come across is leaders calling a meeting, putting meetings into their team's diaries individually or whatever, but not saying what the purpose of the meeting is. And our brains kind of freak out and think, oh, what's that meeting about? It must be bad news. What have I done wrong? So just these little things, like if you're calling a meeting, just sending an agenda or saying what the purpose of the meeting is, just settles the brain and allows the brain to focus back on work or whatever we've got to get done. E stands for equity, a sense of fair play and a sense of transparency. And our need for a sense of equity, fair play does go up when the organisation's going through change, in that we have a sense, if there's going to be change around here, I want to know I've got as good chance as the next person at getting the job I want or resource I want or training I want. That is equity. The last S stands for social connection, and that is one I could talk about all day because I think it's hugely important. And I think it's one we underestimate in organisations, that we are deeply, deeply social creatures. And I think we get it in our personal lives that social connection matters and relationships matter. And on the whole, when relationships are good in life, life is pretty good. But I do think historically in organisations, we've kind of expect employees to walk through the workplace door, either physically or metaphorically, and that somehow relationships shouldn't matter to us in quite the same way because we're professionals, so things shouldn't bother us in quite the same way. But they absolutely do. So we are deeply, deeply social creatures, constantly checking out, do I belong? Do I fit in? If I do, I'm okay. If not, I'm not okay. So say those are the 6 factors. They all matter to all of us, but we do have different preferences. And it's a really interesting exercise to do with the team, to ask them which one matters to them. Are we all very similar as a team? Are we quite different as a team?
And it was fascinating to me that social connection or lack of social connection actually triggers the same neurology as physical pain.
Yeah.
Quite an illuminating disclosure, I think, isn't it? That people actually genuinely feel pain through lack of social connection. It ties into something that was discussed with Julie Hodges, which was the in-group and the out-group. If you're in the out-group, you lose that social connection, and suddenly the whole process becomes a much more difficult thing for both parties, the people who want to impose the change or create the change, and the people who have to implement it and accept it. I think SPACES is really such a great acronym for a really deep set of thought. I mean, self-esteem, purpose, autonomy, certainty, equity, and social connection. The items there, the 6 items that people need to function effectively, I think was extremely and is extremely powerful to me. The certainty element, I think you mentioned that people would rather have bad news than no news, and isn't that illuminating?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's really useful to keep that in our minds. That absolutely, that it's because at least bad news, because I think certainty and autonomy are closely related. Once we've got the bad news, okay, maybe I am going to lose a job or whatever it's going to be, we can kind of get on and make a plan. We can take back autonomy. It's the not knowing that is so difficult for us. And again, working with some bankers a while ago, and I had to work with what was called the bad bank in inverted commas, the people who were going to be out of a job or the bits of the bank were going to be closed down just after the banking crisis. And it was really interesting that the bad bank actually in many ways did better than the people in the main bank. Their employee engagement scores were higher. They hit their targets better. And I was working with these leads and I was saying, what's going on here? How are you doing this? And they said, because we know we're out of a job. We know we're out of here in 18 months or 2 years' time. We're getting on, we're making a plan, we're thinking about our CVs, we're thinking about what skills we've got that are relevant. The people back in the main bank, they might think their jobs are okay, but everybody knows banking's precarious right now. So they don't really know, whereas we know we can get on and plan. So I think that's a really useful thing to remind people of. It's, once we've got the bad news, and it can be really devastating bad news, but once we've got it, we can get on and make a plan. It's the not knowing that's difficult.
And to an extent, I guess that all plays into self-esteem, purpose, and autonomy as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
And certainty. You know what's going to happen. You've got you can do something about it. You've got a degree of autonomy because you have that certainty. And so it's totally inclusive. It's totally inclusive model that you've created for people to understand. I saw your video where you were talking about how the brain accepts change, resists change, goes into the fight, flight mode, survival mode quite naturally. and actually regresses to any teenagers listening at the moment. This is not meant to be pejorative, clearly, but it regresses the brain to a state of, you described as like a teenage state, isn't it? Of again, it's the uncertainty, I guess, of that. Could you sort of build that out for me in a way
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting studies that when we're in that fight or flight mode, part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex is part of the brain that's so important, often referred to as the executive center of the brain, because a really important part of the brain for decision making, working memory, and emotional control is in the prefrontal cortex. When we're in fight or flight, the brain prioritizes other parts of the brain over the prefrontal cortex. So when we're in fight or flight, the prefrontal cortex kind of deprioritized, and that's where our emotional control is. So as you say, we become, research suggests we become much more like teenagers, we become much more emotional, much more volatile, harder to reason with, and that's what we all become like when the brain is in fight or flight.
I think the whole proposition is that we're taking uncertainty out of the picture, involving stakeholders in the change process. I think that's a big thrust of the book, isn't it? Getting people involved, giving them that sense of self-esteem, purpose, autonomy, certainty, equity, and social connection. Not least equity, the ability to engage stakeholders, i.e., employees, in the change process, be part of it. Just,
Yeah.
I was discussing volunteerism and volunteering to look at to build out the higher purpose strategic vision with the leadership team, to be part of that and then part of the change process.
Yeah.
The research demonstrates that actually that is very effective in creating sustainable change. Is that a view that you hold?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the areas organisations that I struggle with is in often there's a kind of a haste to get on with change. And in fact, I did remember talking to one of the large supermarkets a few years ago about change, and I talked about the importance of giving people that chance to get it. I get it. I can see why we need to do X or Y, and I think leaders forget they've often had those few weeks or months to wrap their heads around the data, look at the evidence, and make that decision about this is the course of the right direction for us. And then they tend to just go into broadcast mode with employees, saying, "Okay, here's the strategy, here's the plan, here's what's good for you, here's what's good for customers. Now, please get on with it." And then wonder why most employees dig their heels in and don't want to do it. And the research from the world of neuroscience is very consistent on this, giving people a chance to go, "Oh, I get it. I understand why we're doing this," makes a big difference to our brains. And we're much more likely to be supportive of the change. We're much more likely to keep going when the going gets tough if we've had that time. But I think so many organisations in their haste to get on with change, and I know there's huge volumes of change around at the moment, wave after wave, it's constant. But just stopping and pausing and giving employees a bit of a chance to get it makes a big difference. And I think we all know, those of us who've worked on lots of change in organisations, you've got a choice. You either spend some time up front doing that and giving people that chance to get it, or you push on with change, go into broadcast mode, but then you spend a heck of a lot of time after trying to mop up and persuade and cajole people into changing. And the former is much better.
And the massive cost of failure.
Yeah.
IT implementations are a
Yeah.
classic case where a small group of people go into a room, make a big plan that's going to affect everybody. So we're back into social connection here,
Yeah.
folks. They're not connecting socially. People outside know something's going on, but they're not sure what it is, so they don't have certainty. They've got no idea whether it's going to affect them or whether it's going to be reasonable. The purpose element, they're not involved at all. And so what does that do for your self-esteem? And again, the Spaces model is a very powerful tool in ensuring that all the boxes are ticked, and certainly getting people involved in
Yeah.
that process from the outset. So instead of the usual suspects, which is another endemic problem, who always do the change, getting the stakeholders involved in the change is likely, I think that it would be fair to say, Hilary, but please correct me if I'm wrong, to produce a better outcome, particularly when you pull the frontline people in who are actually closest to the customer.
Yeah, and I think we have to be really clear with employees where they can get involved and where they can't, because not that everyone can decide everything. So I
Of
think
course.
also organisations being really honest about where we want your involvement and where actually that's a decision that has to be made by certain people. But I completely agree with you. Just giving people a little bit of control, a little bit of choice makes a big difference to us. And it is that bit about, because research does show that change that feels a mixture of unpredictable and uncontrollable is very stressful to the human brain. So if we can avoid those two things, that's really helpful. And you mentioned IT programs, and a while ago I was working with the tech team in one of the big global banks, and I can remember one of them sitting there saying, how come everybody wants the latest device, the latest iPhone, the latest smartphone, whatever, and yet when we try and roll out IT changes, everyone resists and hates it. But it is that big difference about choice. I choose when I go and get that new phone. It's my choice, it's mine, as opposed to technology being done to me. And that's what our brains find difficult, the done to me.
And picking up on the iPhone, there's a little gem that Hilary's got in the book about the use of iPhones in meetings. And I'll demur to you here, Hilary, to explain what that is, because again, very important bit of information.
Well, I think I guess it's all sorts about phones. I mean, one, in any sessions that I run, I now do ask people to put their phone out of sight, because there is some really interesting research about. There's a piece of research done a few years ago. Large group, everyone going to be given difficult cognitive tasks to do on screen. One group was told you can have your mobile phone on the desk in front of you, face down, sound off, vibration off. Second group was told also, please turn the sound off, but put your phone into a bag out of sight. Third group was told, just please put your mobile phone into another room. All three groups then given the same difficult cognitive task to do. The group that did by far the best was the group that left their mobile phone in another room. The group who did the worst was the group that could see their mobile phone on the desk in front of them, even face down, sound off. And I think that research just really brings home how incredibly distracted we are by our phones. I know I get incredibly distracted. So right now my phone is in another room because I want to come to you. And I do that if I've really got, if I've got something to write or deep thinking to do, I do get rid of the phone because they are hugely distracting. One thing is, again, we cannot do is multitasking. There is really no such thing in terms of cognitive tasks as multitasking. Even for us women, I'm afraid there's no such thing. It's just task switching. So again, and then we feel like we can do it, actually we can't. And actually it's a very inefficient use of time. And not surprisingly, there's lots of research that shows we make more mistakes, all those kind of things. So, and even some research that shows even if you've got to have a sensitive conversation with somebody at work or at home, it's a really good idea if everybody puts their mobile phone out of sight, because we have a sense that if it doesn't matter whose mobile phone we can see when we're having that conversation, there's a sense that phone might go and you might pick it up and it might be more important, this conversation. So if you've got to have a sensitive conversation with somebody, say work or home, everybody should put their mobile phones out of sight.
And that highlights, isn't it, that we're fundamentally dealing with a 2 million year old brain. I should have people change leadership. For organizational change will be a reference in the Success Consultancy's People Change Leadership framework course. And one of the slides in that does demonstrate that we've got a 2 million year old brain. It isn't wired for iPhones, and it isn't wired for this pace of change. It's wired completely differently. And we're dealing with something that is actually prehistoric, essentially, in a highly technically complex environment and a socially complex environment. And therefore, this is such a seminal work in unpicking that and how to match the two. And you're bringing out edition 3, I'm delighted to hear, in July, Hilary.
That's right.
Could you tell us what the principal changes are, or is that a secret?
No, I can talk about. I'm very happy to talk about that because I think there's some really interesting areas in it. One of the areas I think is really interesting is what's called interbrain synchronization, and this is about when different brains are synchronizing in the same areas at the same time. And this research really is come about now because the technology that neuroscientists use is moving on. It used to be putting people into great big fMRI machines that are noisy and loud and nothing like the workplace. Now the good news is there's lots of portable technology, little caps we can wear on our heads, EEG caps or something that was called FNIRs. And what those little caps mean is that not only can neuroscientists now go into the workplace, into the school or wherever, and follow us around as we're having conversations or sitting in lessons or whatever it might be, but also they can look at multiple brains at the same time. So as we're in a meeting agreeing or disagreeing or whatever might be going on, they can see what's going on in different people's brains.
Wow.
And there's really interesting work, I think, coming out about interbrain synchronization. That the research suggests that when our brains begin to synchronize, we're kind of beginning to see the world from a similar perspective. So if we want to kind of persuade people or work with people or collaborate, it's a really useful thing. Research also shows that our brains tend to synchronize more with people we see more or know better. So there's work done between mothers and children who, brain synchronize a lot. But also what was really interesting about that piece of research is when mother and children were about 12, 13 years of age, when they were talking face to face, their brains were synchronizing a lot. Put them facing a wall, brains don't synchronize much. Get them on screen and brains don't synchronize so much. So I think there's an interesting thing there about technology and how we work. And just being aware of that, the brains tend to synchronize more when we're together in a room than they are on screen. So just being aware of that and thinking, when is the screen good enough? Because it's, I'm all for hybrid working, flexible working, great stuff. But we just need to be aware of when is that good enough and when do I need people to be together? Because there's all sorts of interesting things about when brains do begin to synchronize, or indeed when hearts begin to synchronize. Teams tend to perform better. There's more psychological safety. People seem to be more prepared to share information that then enables teams to make better decisions. So there's all sorts of interesting things, I think, from that interbrain synchronization and the implications for us in terms of how we work together.
Gosh, that's fascinating. Is the suggestion that it's, well, I guess from the research, it appears that there is some kind of physiological, psychological, telepathic kind of integration there.
Well, something's going, yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's interesting. One of the professors I work with at UCL, we always meet face to face, and he just says it's better, isn't it? And he's right. And I think,
Yeah, no.
Hurrah for flexible working, and I'm all for that. But we just need to be aware of what's right at what time. Technology is great, but there is a price to pay with it as well. So it's just worth being aware of that, thinking about that, especially if you're trying to get teams to work together to collaborate. But equally, there might be times when you don't want brains to synchronize. If you want people to be creative and come out with different ideas, then you don't want brains to be synchronizing. You want them to look at the world quite differently. So again, just being aware of that.
And can that synchronization be that rapid? I mean, is the research suggesting that if you have a bunch of people in a room, their brain synchronicity can be very rapid?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some research done where they've got lots of teams together, people working in threes and fours, and they could see those teams where brains began to synchronize much better, worked better together, had better outcomes, and the brain synchronization was more relevant for success than even whether people said they liked the team or not. Actually, it was the synchronization that made the difference in terms of performance. So it can happen. Another thing that does get in the way, so technology can get in the way, another thing that can get in the way of brain synchronization is if one person is dominating the conversation, the brain stops synchronizing. I guess we have a sense of that person kind of imposing themselves on us. So there's nothing to think about that kind of teams that have that give and take in terms of conversation and listening.
And I suppose that feeds into social connections, isn't it? If someone is talking at you, you kind of lose social connection with them, don't you?
Yes.
How fascinating.
No, absolutely. I put that in the social connection chapter because, as you say, I think it is all about social connection, how we connect with people. Yeah.
Wow. Well, listen, I'm straight down to the bookshop. I'm on pre-order.
Well, and there's another really fascinating area. The other area that is interoception, picking up on gut feelings.
Yes, okay.
Gut feelings. Well, science now backs that up. And there's some really interesting research that was done. I think one of the first people to do research in this area was someone called Damasio in the States. And he did this really interesting research about 20 years ago now, his original study, showing actually we're picking up information before our brains are conscious of it. So the example was he got people into the lab, 4 packs of cards on the screen. People were told to turn over cards from each of the 4 packs. They were told the goal is to lose as little money as possible. What people don't know is that 2 of the packs are good packs. You're more likely to make money. 2 of the packs are bad packs. There's actually going to be more forfeits in them. And by about card 10, and people are wired up for skin conductance because when our skins begin to sweat a little bit, that's a sign of stress. So you're wired up for skin conductance. And by about card 10, they could see when the cursor began to hover over a bad pack, we're beginning to sweat. People begin to sweat a little bit. But ask the person what's going on, they go, don't know, haven't got a clue. And then their behaviour began to change. They actually began to pick more cards from the good packs. But it took until about card 50 for the participants to say, Oh, I get it. I think two of the packs are better than others. So it's a really interesting example of our bodies picking up on information before we're consciously aware of it. And other people have gone on to do work in the city with traders, stressful job, and they found that those traders who are better in tune with their bodies, in this case with their heart rate, made better decisions under stress. So if there is something about those people who are more in tune with their bodies, it can be useful for decision making. It's also very useful in terms of emotional regulation as well. People who are in touch with their internal feelings are better emotionally regulating, which of course is really important to all of us at work and outside work.
And judges should eat before they make a judgment.
Well, that's an interesting one. That is the only one. That's the only study in the book was a slight question mark now. Before having a break, because the judges, having a break, you say, did change their decision making. But there's now some quite slight question marks about did the glucose from whatever they eat have time to get into their bodies and brains to make the decision. So eating something, having a break for sure does change people's decision making. Yeah.
Wow, there's so much to unpack, and we could talk for hours, and perhaps we should. The subject of the book is Neuroscience for Organizational Change. If you were to summarize the key thrust of neuroscience for organizational change, how do you explain it to a group?
You touched on it earlier, actually. I think partly it is about, we're working with, in the 21st century workplace, we're working with brains that are really better designed for the savannah. They're not designed for the 21st century workplace. And that's the challenge we all face, that dealing with technology and emails popping up and phones going off and whatever it might be, open plan offices. Our brains are not designed to deal with that. The good news, I think, is if we can understand our brains better, we can work with that knowledge and we can manage things to help our brains work at their best. So I am a big believer that every one of us should understand our brains a little bit better to enable us to work with that knowledge and to make choices and help the brain keep performing at its best. Because, for example, our brains cannot be brilliant all day long. One of the neuroscientists I work with in the States reckons we've only got 2 great hours a day. And he's got a point. No one would put it more than 4 great hours. But again, how do you know where your 2 good hours are? Are you a morning person? You're an afternoon person? And how do you plan your working day to make sure, in those 2 great hours, you're doing the important work, the deep work, the challenging work, and not your admin and your emails? Having that kind of knowledge, I think, is really helpful. And so the good news is we probably have got more control of our brains than we realise when we understand them.
And that's why, dear listener and viewer, Neuroscience for Organizational Change, Edition 3, due out in July 2025, is a book that, if you're interested in how your brain works, but specifically and particularly how your brain works in the context of organizational change, it's a must-read book, comes thoroughly recommended from me. Edition 3 will be devoured at a very early stage after publication by me, and will be actually one of, the references for our People Change Leadership course. So, Hilary Scarlett, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for the book, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thanks, Hilary.
Many thanks for listening to our Just Great People podcast. And you can really help us. Please do remember to like and subscribe, and please share this podcast with everybody you know. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.